Imagine waking up to the news that a president has ordered the complete destruction of a global science experiment worth millions of dollars. That's exactly what happened in Burkina Faso. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't just pause a program, he dismantled it. Every lab sample destroyed. Every field test halted. Years of research, funding, and promises, all swept away in a single command. And this wasn't just any project. It was the world-famous Target Malaria Initiative, backed heavily by some of the most powerful foundations on the planet. A project that claimed to hold the future of Africa's fight against one of its deadliest killers, malaria. So why shut it down? Why destroy something that scientists said could save millions of lives? To understand, we need to step back and ask the uncomfortable question. What were these mosquitoes? Really? At first glance, the idea sounds like pure genius. Scientists took one of the deadliest creatures in Africa, the Anopheles mosquito, and rewired its very DNA. The trick? Forced the species to produce mostly male offspring. And since only female mosquitoes bite and spread malaria, the logic was simple. Fewer females, less disease, less death. On paper, it looks like a miracle fix for an ancient problem, a modern weapon against a killer that has haunted humanity for centuries. For a moment, you might even want to applaud the brilliance. But in Africa, the applause never came. Instead, alarms went off. Because the moment people hear the words genetically modified tied to African soil, memory floods back. Memory of betrayal, memory of experiments that promised prosperity but delivered loss. And suddenly, that clever little mosquito doesn't look like a solution anymore. It looks like a warning. Here's where the story starts to feel less like innovation and more like power in disguise. Because the genetic editing, the very heart of this experiment, wasn't happening in Burkina Faso, or in Mali, Uganda, or Ghana. No, it was taking place in high-tech laboratories in Europe, most notably at Imperial College London. And that's where the patents and intellectual property live. Not in Africa. Not with the local scientists who are raising and monitoring these mosquitoes. They only get to release them into the wild and track the results. But the core of the science, the knowledge, the DNA edits, the technology remains firmly in the hands of institutions thousands of miles away. So it's not that Africans are against science. Not at all. They embrace progress, innovation, solutions. What they resist is being used as the front line for experiments whose consequences are unknown, while control and profit stay elsewhere. It's a story that repeats across the continent. Africa supplies the land, the field, the people, but the power, the patents, the profit stay in foreign hands. And that's why suspicion flares before any experiment even begins. To understand why skepticism runs so deep, you have to look at Africa's history with genetically modified crops. Take maize and cotton, for example. Promises were made: higher yields, pest resistance, economic freedom. Sounds perfect, right? But the reality has often been very different. South Africa is the only African country that fully commercialized GMOs. Over 85% of maize and nearly all cotton grown there is genetically engineered. But who profits from this? Not African farmers, not local companies. Instead, multinational giants like Monsanto, now Bayer and Corteva, dominate the seed market. Farmers don't just buy seeds once. They are legally forced to buy new GMO seeds every single season. The cost can be up to 5 times higher than traditional varieties. Add in the companion chemicals, herbicides and pesticides they must also purchase. And suddenly a farmer who once worked the land independently is locked into a cycle of dependency and debt. This isn't just economics. It's sovereignty being quietly chipped away, seed by seed. And it's a history that makes the introduction of genetically modified mosquitoes feel like the next chapter in a story Africans know all too well. Now let's zoom in on Burkina Faso, a country where cotton was more than just a crop. It was a source of pride, a backbone of the economy, and a symbol of national identity. That pride was targeted by the introduction of GMO cotton, heavily supported by multinational corporations and global foundations. At first, the promises sounded irresistible: higher yields, pest resistance, a brighter future for farmers. But the reality was devastating. The cotton's quality deteriorated rapidly, pests adapted, and yields dropped. What was supposed to be a golden opportunity turned into a disaster. By 2016, Burkina Faso's government made a hard decision. GMO cotton was officially abandoned. The country had lost 60% of its export earnings almost overnight. Farmers watched helplessly as millions of dollars vanished from the global market. Their pride, their livelihoods, even the reputation of their cotton had all been compromised. Imagine a nation's flagship crop collapsing, not because of nature, but because of a foreign-promoted technology that failed spectacularly. This is the context in which genetically modified mosquitoes would later land. A continent painfully aware that promises of innovation can quickly become lessons in loss. But the damage didn't stop at economics. GMO crops brought another silent crisis: the erosion of biodiversity. Indigenous seed varieties, carefully preserved and cultivated for generations, began to disappear. Farmers who had relied on local seeds for centuries suddenly found themselves dependent on patented hybrids, entirely controlled by corporations. And with these seeds came chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers that farmers had no choice but to buy. The very promise of pest-resistant crops crumbled as pests adapted, forcing even smallholders into spiraling cycles of debt. Fields that once thrived with local varieties became monocultures, stripping the land of resilience and diversity. It was more than agriculture, it was control, not over the land alone, but over the very lifeblood of African farming communities. And it's this history of dependency and lost autonomy that shapes the way Africans view any new experiment in genetics, whether it's in the soil beneath their feet or the mosquitoes buzzing above their heads. And then there's the bigger picture: the role of global philanthropy in shaping African agriculture. Organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, through initiatives such as the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, or AGRA, promised to modernize farming across the continent. They poured billions into the vision of a high-tech, high-yield Africa, painting a picture of progress and prosperity. But the reality told a different story. Independent evaluations revealed that AGRA's interventions failed to reduce hunger in the 13 countries where it operated. Instead, they deepened dependency on imported seeds and fertilizers, while pushing local seed systems to the margins. Pesticide use skyrocketed, doubling in countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa, exposing farmers and the environment to new risks. This isn't just about failed experiments. It's about the repeated pattern of promises that sound like salvation, but whose benefits rarely reach the communities they claim to serve. It's this pattern: billions spent, little local control, and persistent vulnerability, that makes Africans naturally wary when the next miracle solution arrives, whether in their crops, their bodies, or, as we'll see, in the skies above them. So when Africans hear the term genetically modified, it's not just about science, it's about memory. Memories of broken promises, of crops that failed, of livelihoods lost, of sovereignty quietly stripped away. Every seed that arrives with a foreign label carries with it decades of lessons learned the hard way. And now, imagine placing that fear into something far more delicate than cotton or maize, something that lives, breathes, and multiplies in the skies above. A mosquito. Mosquitoes are not just pests. They are part of a vast, intricate ecosystem, food for birds, bats, frogs, fish. Alter their DNA, release them into the wild, and you're not just fighting malaria anymore. You're rewriting the script of nature itself. And Africans, having witnessed too many projects where their land, bodies, and resources were controlled by outsiders, instinctively ask, who gave anyone the right to rewrite life, gene by gene, species by species? This isn't fear of progress. It's a deep, hard-earned caution, wisdom born from experience. And it's why the introduction of genetically modified mosquitoes is not received with curiosity alone. It's met with vigilance, with suspicion, with questions that no one has fully answered. And then there's the most chilling part. Once released, there's no going back. You can recall a drug, withdraw a vaccine, or halt a chemical spray. But a genetically modified species in the wild, once it's out, it's out. There is no undo button, no rewind, no way to lock them back up and reverse the changes. For Africans, this carries the weight of history. Too often, experiments have gone wrong, leaving the consequences to be borne by those with the least power. And this is exactly why groups across West Africa have loudly declared, we will not be guinea pigs. It's not rebellion. It's a refusal to allow history to repeat itself. It's a statement that the scars of past mistakes matter, and that wisdom born from survival cannot be ignored. Because when you tinker with life itself, whether in the soil, the seed, or the sky, the consequences are permanent. And Africans have learned that lesson the hard way. Yet the story grows even more complex. Burkina Faso's government had initially approved the mosquito project. National biosafety agencies signed off. Environmental assessments were completed. Ethics committees gave their nod. Communities were consulted, or at least they were told they were. Everything appeared legal, orderly, and safe. A small batch of male-biased mosquitoes was even quietly released into the skies, a pilot test meant to prove the concept. Scientists assured everyone it was not a full gene drive, just a controlled trial. Millions of dollars had already been invested, labs built, researchers trained, villagers convinced of safety. And then, in less than a week, everything changed. President Traore intervened. Permits were revoked. Research was halted. Labs dismantled. The project, one of the most expensive malaria experiments ever attempted on African soil, was effectively erased overnight. The question hangs heavy. What went wrong? Was it science, politics, public opinion, or something more? Nobody has a clear answer, yet the speed and decisiveness of the reversal speak volumes. Something, somewhere, triggered a red line that could not be crossed. Just when you think the mosquito story alone is enough to raise eyebrows, another storm appears on the horizon: contraceptives. Headlines explode with claims, 8-year contraceptives for African girls, and social media runs wild. Rumors swirl, suggesting secret tests on children. The truth, far less sinister. The 8 years refers to the duration the device can safely remain in the body, not the age of anyone receiving it. Devices like Mirena have existed for decades, approved for long-term use. Foundations are simply funding access programs to make these contraceptives more available and affordable in Africa. But facts alone cannot erase history. Africa's collective memory around reproductive control is long, painful, and unhealed. Colonial programs once targeted women for sterilization without consent. Under apartheid in South Africa, Black women were pressured into long-acting contraceptives as a tool of state control. In Kenya, rumors of hormone-laced vaccines stirred distrust. So, even when fact-checkers prove rumors false, skepticism remains. It's not about ignorance, it's about memory, about lessons learned from decades of outsiders deciding who gets to reproduce. And when these programs arrive today, funded by the same global foundations behind genetically modified mosquitoes, the caution deepens. History whispers. We've seen this pattern before. At first glance, genetically modified mosquitoes and long-acting contraceptives might seem completely unrelated. But in Africa, they are part of the same story. Both touch the most intimate aspects of life: survival, reproduction, and sovereignty. Both are introduced quickly, heavily funded, and largely controlled from abroad. And both carry the weight of history. When Africans see these programs, they don't just think about malaria or birth control. They remember a pattern: foreign interventions arriving under the guise of progress, yet leaving dependency, lost control, and skepticism in their wake. Every promise, no matter how scientific or benevolent it seems, is measured against decades of experience. Who lives, who dies, who reproduces? These are not abstract questions. They are real, deeply personal, and historically charged. And when these interventions are tied to the same powerful global foundations, trust is not easily won. Even when fact-checkers step in to clarify rumors, skepticism lingers. Headlines can be corrected, reports can be published, yet history cannot be erased. Africans remember. They remember colonial sterilization programs, the exploitation of their crops, the chemical dependency forced upon their farmers, and the countless experiments where outsiders controlled the outcome. This is why, even in the face of modern science, distrust is not ignorance. It is wisdom born from experience. It is a protective instinct, a collective refusal to allow history to repeat itself. Africans are saying, we will not be used as test subjects. We will not hand over control of our bodies, our lands, or our ecosystems without a voice in the process. So, when Burkina Faso destroyed the genetically modified mosquitoes, it wasn't a rejection of innovation. It was a statement of sovereignty, a declaration that Africa will no longer silently bear the consequences of foreign experiments, no matter how well-intentioned they claim to be. And this brings us to the hardest question of all. Who truly benefits from these programs? Is it the African farmers, the communities at risk of malaria, the women seeking access to safe contraception? Or is it the global institutions controlling the patents, the labs funding the research, and the corporations profiting from seeds, chemicals, and technology? When you trace the money and the control, the answer becomes clear. The promise of progress often comes with strings attached, strings that tie African communities to dependency, limit autonomy, and extract value in ways that rarely reach those who need it most. It's a pattern repeated across generations, across projects, across technologies. And it is why Africans no longer accept promises at face value. Every new solution is scrutinized through the lens of lived experience. Who wins here and who loses? This is the invisible thread connecting mosquitoes, GMO crops, and contraceptives. The struggle over control, the question of sovereignty, and the enduring memory of promises that never delivered. So before we end, take a moment to ask yourself, why is it that Africa always seems to be the testing ground? Why are the failures buried quietly while the successes are broadcast as triumphs? This isn't just science or technology. This is about sovereignty. It's about dignity. It's about survival. Every crop, every mosquito, every intervention touches the lives of real people, their bodies, their lands, their future. And while headlines may fade and debates may shift, the consequences remain. Africa's memory is long, and it will not be ignored. So the next time you hear of a new project landing on the continent, remember what's truly at stake. the right of a people to decide their own path, free from outside control. This is not just a story about mosquitoes or seeds. It is a story about power, respect, and the fight to protect what is inherently yours.